Welcome to Btslover channel. Tonight, we're diving into a story that has ARMY questioning everything once again. From subtle glances to moments that feel a little too sincere, Jikook's connection is sparking new conversations. Are these just coincidences or love signals quietly revealed once more? Stay with us, because what you're about to see may change how you view Jimin and Jungkook forever. We're diving into a story that has ARMY questioning everything once again. From subtle glances to moments that feel a little too sincere, Jikook's connection is sparking new conversations. Are these just coincidences or love signals quietly revealed once more? Stay with us, because what you're about to hear may change how you see Jimin and Jungkook forever. It never starts with something big. It never does. Not with Jikook. It always begins with something small, almost invisible to the untrained eye. A glance held a second longer than necessary. A smile that appears before the joke is even finished. A body that leans closer without realizing it has already crossed the line between comfort and longing. And that is exactly why ARMY keeps watching. Because with Jimin and Jungkook, the smallest moments often carry the loudest meaning. Recently, conversations reignited not because of a grand declaration or a dramatic scene, but because of a series of quiet interactions that felt strangely familiar. Familiar, yet deeper, softer, yet heavier, as if something unspoken had returned to the surface, refusing to stay hidden any longer. Fans began to ask the same question again, the one that never truly goes away. What exactly is the relationship between Jimin and Jungkook? For years, the phrase "more than just friends" has followed them like a shadow. It appears in comments, theories, late-night discussions, and whispered debates across timelines. And every time it resurfaces, it does so not with force, but with evidence made of emotion rather than facts. Jikook has never been loud. They have never needed to be. Think back to how it all started. Jungkook, the youngest, full of raw emotion, often wearing his heart too close to the surface. Jimin, gentle yet intense, someone who feels deeply and expresses love through presence rather than words. From the early days, there was a pull between them that felt natural, almost inevitable. They gravitated toward each other not because they had to, but because they wanted to. Over time, that closeness matured. It changed shape. It grew quieter, but it never disappeared. What ARMY noticed recently wasn't a new behavior, but a return to something old, something that felt like home. The way Jungkook's eyes instinctively searched for Jimin in a room full of people. The way Jimin responded not with surprise, but with familiarity, as if he had been waiting for that look. These are not actions learned overnight. These are habits built over years. There is something deeply telling about comfort. Real comfort doesn't perform. It doesn't seek attention. It exists even when no one is watching. And yet, somehow, Jikook's comfort always finds a way to be seen. In one moment that quickly became a topic of discussion, Jungkook laughed softly, genuinely at something Jimin said that others barely reacted to. It wasn't the laugh itself that caught attention, but the timing. He laughed before the sentence even ended, as if he already knew how it would land. As if he had memorized Jimin's rhythm so well that the words no longer mattered. Is that friendship? Of course it can be. But is it only that? Another moment followed shortly after. Jimin reached out, not dramatically, not intentionally. Just a small movement. A hand brushing past Jungkook's arm. Jungkook didn't flinch. He didn't look surprised. Instead, he leaned in slightly, unconsciously closing the distance. That instinctive response spoke louder than any words ever could. ARMY has learned to read between the lines because Jikook has taught them how. Not intentionally, perhaps, but inevitably. When you share so much of yourself with the world, even your silences begin to speak. What makes this connection so compelling isn't the idea of romance alone. It's the emotional depth that feels undeniable. Jimin often mirrors Jungkook's energy, grounding him when he drifts too far into himself. Jungkook, in turn, watches Jimin with a kind of protectiveness that feels instinctive rather than assumed. They balance each other in ways that feel intimate, even when they're surrounded by others. There are moments when Jungkook seems quieter, more observant. In those moments, Jimin becomes louder not in volume, but in presence. He fills the space, gently pulling Jungkook back into the moment. And when Jimin grows tired, emotionally or physically, Jungkook shifts. He becomes attentive, almost careful, as if carrying something fragile. This is where the love signals conversation becomes unavoidable. Love does not always announce itself. Sometimes it shows up as understanding without explanation. Sometimes it's knowing when to stay close and when to step back. Sometimes it's the ability to exist together in silence without feeling the need to fill it. One of the most talked about aspects of Jikook is how little they explain their bond. They don't label it. They don't defend it. They don't clarify it. They simply live it. And in doing so, they leave room for interpretation, speculation, and endless curiosity. But perhaps that's the point. In a world that demands definitions, Jikook remains undefined. And that ambiguity feels intentional, even if it isn't planned. It allows their connection to breathe. It allows it to grow without pressure. It allows it to be what it is, rather than what others want it to be. Fans often point out that Jungkook behaves differently around Jimin, not dramatically different, but subtly so. His voice softens, his movements slow, his expressions become more open. It's as if being near Jimin lowers his guard, even when cameras are present. Jimin, on the other hand, seems to understand Jungkook's emotional shifts before anyone else does. He notices when Jungkook withdraws, when he's overwhelmed, when he's overthinking, and instead of calling attention to it, Jimin simply stays, sometimes beside him, sometimes just within sight. These are not actions that demand attention. These are actions rooted in care. So when fans say, more than just friends, what they are really saying is this feels deeper than what we usually see, deeper than casual affection, deeper than fan service, deeper than coincidence. And yet, nothing about Jikook feels forced. That's what keeps the conversation alive. If it were obvious, it would be easy. If it were fake, it would fade. But instead, it lingers, quietly, persistently, like a question that refuses to be answered. There are moments when Jimin looks at Jungkook, as if he's seeing something others don't. Something private, something familiar. And Jungkook returns that look not with confidence, but with vulnerability, as if he feels safe enough to be seen. Safety is not a small thing, not in an industry built on image and performance. Finding someone who feels like safety is rare, and when you do, you hold on to it. As the story continues, the question doesn't disappear, it deepens, because the more people observe Jimin and Jungkook, the clearer it becomes that their bond operates on a level that doesn't need explanation. It exists in the spaces between moments, in pauses that feel intentional, in reactions that come too naturally to be accidental. There was a time when Jungkook openly spoke about how much Jimin meant to him. Back then, the words came easily. He smiled when he said Jimin's name, laughed softly, almost shyly, as if admitting something that felt personal. Over the years, those words became fewer, but the actions became louder. And sometimes silence says far more than any confession ever could. In recent appearances, fans notice how Jungkook's attention seemed to drift not away, but inward until Jimin entered his space. Suddenly, Jungkook became present again. His posture changed, his eyes lifted. It was subtle, but unmistakable, as if Jimin's presence acted as an anchor, pulling him back from wherever his thoughts had wandered. Jimin, meanwhile, never appeared surprised by this effect. He moved with the quiet confidence of someone who already knows his place. He didn't exaggerate his reactions. He didn't seek validation. He simply existed beside Jungkook, comfortable in a role that didn't need to be defined. This dynamic is what continues to fuel conversations among ARMY. Not because it looks dramatic, but because it feels intimate. Intimacy isn't always loud. Often, it's gentle. Often, it's invisible unless you're paying attention. There's a particular way Jimin listens to Jungkook. It's not just with his ears, but with his whole body. He leans in slightly, his eyes soft, his expression open. Even when Jungkook speaks casually, Jimin listens as if every word matters. And Jungkook, sensing that attention, allows himself to speak freely. He stumbles sometimes, laughs at himself, relaxes into the moment. This kind of exchange doesn't happen overnight. It's built over years of trust, shared experiences, and unspoken understanding. Fans often ask whether these moments are intentional or unconscious. The truth might be somewhere in between. Perhaps Jimin and Jungkook aren't trying to send signals at all. Perhaps they are simply being themselves, unaware of how deeply their connection resonates with others. But even if that's the case, the impact remains. There was another moment that caught attention, a brief pause in conversation. A silence that lasted just a second longer than usual. Jungkook looked at Jimin, as if waiting for him to speak. Jimin smiled faintly, then nodded, giving nothing away. Jungkook smiled back, relieved, as if receiving reassurance without needing to hear it aloud. What was exchanged in that moment? No one knows, and yet, everyone felt it. This is where the idea of love signals becomes complicated, because love doesn't always look like grand gestures or obvious affection. Sometimes it looks like familiarity, like knowing exactly how long to wait before filling the silence, like understanding someone's emotions without them needing to explain. Jikook has always existed in this space of quiet understanding. As time goes on, fans notice that even when they are physically apart, their presence lingers. Jungkook mentions Jimin casually, as if his name is a constant in his thoughts. Jimin references Jungkook with warmth that feels instinctive rather than performative. Neither of them makes a big deal out of it. And yet, the consistency speaks volumes. Consistency is one of the strongest indicators of sincerity. If this were a performance, it would fluctuate. It would appear when convenient and disappear when it wasn't. But Jikook's dynamic remains steady, regardless of setting, timing, or audience. It adapts, but it doesn't vanish. And perhaps that's why it continues to captivate. There is also a noticeable protectiveness that surfaces in small ways. Jungkook watches Jimin carefully in crowded situations, his gaze following him instinctively. Jimin, in turn, seems to sense when Jungkook needs space, gently guiding him away from overwhelming moments without drawing attention. These are not actions that demand recognition. They are acts of care that exist quietly, almost privately, even when witnessed by millions. ARMY has learned to pick up on these details not because they are searching for proof, but because Jikook keeps offering moments that feel emotionally honest. And honesty, when displayed repeatedly, becomes impossible to ignore. Of course, there are skeptics. There always are. Some argue that closeness doesn't equal romance, that affection between friends can be deep without being romantic. And that is true. But what makes Jikook different isn't just the affection, it's the emotional synchronization. They seem attuned to each other's moods in a way that goes beyond coincidence. When one grows quieter, the other softens. When one laughs freely, the other mirrors that joy. Their emotional rhythms align, as if tuned to the same frequency.